Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, confusing figures in history, King Solomon. On one hand, you have a man who was literally blessed with divine wisdom, a legendary builder, the author of timeless truths. But on the other hand, you have a guy who made some of the most catastrophic, foolish decisions imaginable.
And that right there, that's the central mystery we're going to unpack. How on earth could someone who knew so much, who seemingly understood right and wrong better than anyone, get it so spectacularly wrong in his own life? It just doesn't seem to add up.
And the key that unlocks this entire paradox is right here. It all boils down to this one powerful idea. Knowing the right thing to do and actually doing the right thing are two totally different worlds. If you can grasp that concept, you can understand Solomon's story. So let's start at the beginning. His story began with so much promise. You couldn't ask for a better start. Early in his reign, God basically offers him a blank check, ask for anything you want. And instead of power or money, Solomon humbly asks for wisdom. God was so impressed that he gave him the wisdom and then threw in wealth and honor on top of it. What a start!
But from that incredible high point, the story takes a sharp, and I mean sharp turn. So now, let's look at the evidence. Let's build the case file, if you will, a catalog of choices that directly contradict the very wisdom he was given.
Now check this out, because this is what's so wild. The rulebook for future kings was written long before Solomon was even born. In Deuteronomy, God laid out some very clear rules. Don't collect a ton of horses, don't marry a bunch of foreign wives, don't hoard gold and silver, and don't make deals with Egypt. These weren't random. They were designed to keep the king depending on God, not on military power or political games. And Solomon? He basically used that list as a to-do list. He broke every single one.
Okay, let's just park on one of those for a second. The wives. Look at that number, 700 wives, plus 300 concubines. And God's warning was crystal clear. They will turn your heart after their gods. That wasn't a suggestion, it was a guarantee. But Solomon must have thought, in his wisdom, nah, I'm different. I'm wise enough to manage this risk. Spoiler alert, he wasn't.
And this is the direct result. This is what happens. His wives didn't just move in, they brought their religions with them. And Solomon didn't just tolerate it, he paid for it. Think about that. The same man who built God's magnificent temple then turned around and built shrines to rival gods on the hills right outside Jerusalem. He was literally bankrolling the spiritual corruption of his own kingdom.
And the pattern just keeps going. He got so rich that silver was supposedly as common as rocks in the street. He crushed his own people with taxes and labor to pay for his projects. And get this little detail, because it's a huge tell. It took him 7 years to build God's temple, but almost double that, 13 years, to build his own palace. That tells you everything you need to know about where his priorities were shifting. And this is where the story becomes just tragically ironic. This piece of incredible advice comes from Proverbs, written by Solomon himself. The man who taught the world to guard your heart was the same one who left the front door to his own heart completely wide open. He knew the truth. He wrote the truth. He just didn't live it. Okay, so that's the what. That's the evidence. But the much bigger question is, why? How does a man like this fall so far? Let's take a look at the anatomy of his downfall. Because it wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow, gradual drift. This lays out the process perfectly. You see, it never starts with building a giant idol. It starts with a tiny shift in the heart, an affection that moves just a few degrees. Then, all the success that God gave him made him forget he ever needed God in the first place. He started trusting his own gut, his own wisdom, to bend the rules. And before you know it, the thing you swore you'd never do is just normal. So if you boil it all down, here's the core issue: misplaced trust. Solomon never lost his wisdom, he just stopped being ruled by it. He started trusting his own ability to manage the compromise more than he trusted God's clear command to avoid it. That was the foundational error that everything else grew out of. So now, let's pull the camera back and see how this internal drift played out over the course of his entire life, because it really does unfold like a classic tragedy in 4 acts. This timeline really shows the whole arc. Act 1, you've got young, humble Solomon, receiving wisdom and writing the brilliant truths of Proverbs. Act 2, the subtle drift begins. He's still a good king on the outside, but those little compromises, the palace, the alliances, are setting in. Act 3, it's an open collapse. He's all in on idolatry and excess. And then finally, Act 4, as an old man, he looks back with sober reflection, and that's when he writes the book of Ecclesiastes.
So, in the beginning, this is what he sounds like. Clear,
confident, grounded. He knows exactly where real wisdom comes from. He gets it.
But now, fast forward a few decades, and listen to the voice of Act 4 Solomon. This is the man who chased every desire, got everything he thought he wanted, and this is his conclusion. The tone isn't wise and confident, it's just weary and empty. The contrast between these two quotes tells the whole tragic story.
So what are we supposed to do with all of this? Solomon's life isn't just an ancient story. It's a profound, timeless lesson about the human condition. Let's really distill the final takeaways for us today.
First, his life screams at us that just knowing the truth isn't any kind of protection. In fact, his greatest strength, his wisdom, became his biggest weakness because it made him overconfident. He shows us that those small compromises you justify today, well, they're the foundation for tomorrow's collapse. And maybe most importantly, this journey isn't about having one strong start. It's about daily surrender. You have to actively guard your heart. It doesn't happen by accident.
And here it is, Solomon's final conclusion. After trying everything else, wealth, women, power, pleasure, he comes full circle, right back to the simple truth he walked away from decades earlier. It's the voice of a man who finally rediscovered what actually matters after wasting so much time on what doesn't.
And that leaves us with this final, really piercing question. If a man with every possible advantage, with God-given wisdom, could drift so far and fall so hard, what does that say about our own blind spots? What are the subtle compromises, the misplaced trusts, and the unguarded corners of our own hearts that we need to be watching? Because if he could fall, any of us can.